It was the last week of October, just a week before Halloween, when Lydia found herself wandering into a strange little antique shop tucked away at the very edge of town. You know, the kind of place the air inside was thick with the smell of dust and old memories, like opening a book that hadn't been touched in 100 years. Behind the counter sat a frail old woman, her eyes clouded over like a foggy morning. She was knitting something bright red, and she didn't even look up when she asked, looking for a costume. Her voice was like rustling leaves. Lydia, feeling a little spooked, but also intrigued, just nodded. "Something unique," she managed to say. A slow, cracked smile spread across the old woman's lips. "Ah," she rasped. "Then you'll want the mask. It's been waiting for someone just like you." With slow, deliberate movements, she reached under the counter and pulled out a small, dark wooden box. She opened it with the care of a surgeon. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a porcelain mask. It was a pale, almost luminous white, with a painted grin that stretched just a little too wide, a little too eagerly. It was almost human, but there was something unsettlingly *** about it. The eye holes were just deep, black voids. "It's handmade," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "Once you put it on, it will fit you perfectly." Lydia gave a nervous laugh. "Okay, creepy. How much?" The woman's smile didn't falter. $10, she said, "but a word of warning, be sure to wear it only on Halloween night." Lydia paid the $10 and took the box, a shiver running down her spine she couldn't quite explain. That night, back in her bedroom, she couldn't stop looking at the mask. It sat on her dresser, and the grin seemed to shimmer and shift in the dim light. At one point, she could have sworn she saw it twitch. Just a tiny, infinitesimal movement. She blinked, told herself it was just a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Halloween arrived in a blur of excitement and spooky decorations. Lydia had her costume planned, a broken porcelain doll. She put on a tattered dress, smudged her makeup to look like cracks, and then, finally, she picked up the mask. The inside was as smooth and cool as river stone. She lifted it to her face, and as soon as it made contact, it moved. It wasn't her hands. The mask itself seemed to come alive. The edges stretched and tightened, molding to the contours of her face, sealing itself to her skin like a second, colder layer. "Whoa," she laughed, her voice muffled behind the porcelain. "Creepy but perfect." She turned to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but the grin on the mask was wider now, more pronounced. It was a perfect, chilling costume. At the party, everyone loved it. That mask is incredible. It looks so real. Too real. The compliments felt less like praise and more like observations of a strange truth. At one point, a friend reached out to touch it, and a sharp sting, like a pinprick, shot through Lydia from under the mask. She flinched and brushed it off as static electricity, but a knot of dread began to tighten in her stomach. As the night wore on, things got weirder. She started hearing faint whispers, voices that seemed to come from right beside her ear, yet no one was there. "Stay with us," they hissed. "Don't take it off. You're one of us now." Her vision started to blur at the edges, the colorful party lights swirling into a disorienting mess. The mask felt alive. It was warm now, and she could feel something pulsing against her skin, a faint rhythm that wasn't her own heartbeat. Panic seized her. This wasn't fun anymore. Lydia rushed to the bathroom, desperate to get some air, to see her own face again. She clawed at the edges of the mask, trying to pull it off, but it wouldn't budge. It was fused to her. Her fingernails scraped against the porcelain, making a horrible screeching sound, but they didn't leave a single scratch. Tears welled in her eyes, but they couldn't fall. Then, a voice whispered from inside the mask, a voice that was both her own and not her own. "You smiled for me," it said, a cold, mocking tone. "Now, it's my turn." She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her heart pounding against her ribs. The reflection grinned back at her. Wasn't her grin. It was the masks. And then the impossible happened. The mask's eyes, the empty black holes, blinked. Her friends found her later that night, long after the music had died down. She was standing motionless in a dark corner of the room, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, that same wide-painted smile fixed on her face. They laughed, assuming she was still in character, trying to pull one last prank. "All right, Lydia, party's over," one of them said, tapping her on the shoulder. With a sharp, sickening crack of bone, her head snapped toward them. The porcelain face smiled on, unblinking, unwavering, but where Lydia's warm, brown eyes should have been, there was only darkness. Her real eyes were gone. The mask had taken them. It had taken all of her. The next morning, the police investigated the now silent house. It was empty, a mess of post-party debris. But in the middle of the living room floor, they found a single, dark wooden box. Inside it, resting on the faded velvet, was a mask. It was the same pale white porcelain. It had the same painted grin, but this time the grin looked a little different. Sharper. More defined. If you looked closely, you could see it. It looked exactly like Lydia's. We're taking a walk down the forgotten Ashbury Lane, to a place that has been the subject of hushed whispers for decades. You've probably heard the stories, seen the boarded-up windows of the old costume shop, its sign faded into a ghost of its former self. But have you ever heard what the locals say happens every Halloween? They swear that if you look closely, you can see a faint, flickering glow from within, as if someone or something is still at work. They say the old owner, the legendary Madame Corvain, never truly left. To understand the chill that grips this place, we have to travel back in time. Back to the 1950s. In those days, Madame Corvain wasn't a ghost story. She was the most sought-after seamstress in town. Her creations weren't just costumes, they were masterpieces. Masks that seemed to hold a life of their own, gowns that shimmered like captured moonlight. It was said she could sew anything your heart desired, turning simple fabric into pure magic. But behind this incredible talent lay a quiet, burning obsession to create something so perfect, so utterly beautiful, that it would transcend time itself. Something that would never die. She poured her soul into her work, but soon she would be asked to pour in something more. It was on a crisp autumn night, with the leaves whispering secrets on the pavement, that the bell above her shop door chimed. A mysterious stranger stepped inside. He was tall, silent, and wrapped in a heavy black cloak that seemed to swallow the light around him. Without a word, he moved to the counter and placed a strange, tattered bundle upon the polished wood. "Make me a costume," he commanded, his voice a low, cold rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air of the shop. "A costume that will last forever." Madame Corvain, a master of all textiles, looked down at the bundle. The material was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was soft, oddly textured, and had a strange, organic pattern to it. She reached out, her fingers hesitating just above the surface. "What? What kind of fabric is this?" she asked, her own voice barely a whisper. The stranger's eyes, hidden in shadow, seemed to glint. "Not fabric," he replied, the words sharp and final. "Skin." Before she could process the horror of his statement, before she could scream or run, the man was gone. He vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving only the chilling echo of his words and the pale, disturbing bundle on her counter. The shop was silent again, but the air was thick with a new, terrifying energy. Madame Corvain stood frozen, staring at the material. It was pale, unervingly warm to the touch, and impossibly soft. Every instinct she had screamed at her to burn it, to call the police, to rid herself of this unholy thing. But another part of her, the artist, the perfectionist, was captivated. She reached out a trembling hand and touched it. It was then that she felt it, a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a dying heartbeat. It was alive. Or, at least, it had been. The obsession that had driven her for years now took a dark and twisted turn. The The desire to create the perfect, undying masterpiece consumed her. She had to know what she could make from it. Days blurred into sleepless nights. The world outside her shop ceased to exist as she worked tirelessly, stitching by the wavering light of a single candle. The unique texture of the material was difficult, and soon her own fingers bled, staining the rusted needles and the pale fabric with her own life force. That's when the whispers started. At first, they were faint, like the rustling of leaves or the sigh of the wind, but they grew louder, clearer, slithering into her thoughts from the corners of the room. Finish it. The voices hissed. Give it a body, and then, the most chilling of all, let me wear it. The more she sewed, the more the costume seemed to take on a life of its own. It felt heavier in her hands each day, and warmer, as if generating its own heat. Sometimes, when the candlelight hit it just right, she could swear she saw faint blue lines running beneath the surface, like a network of veins. The whispers urged her on, promising perfection, promising immortality through her creation. Her sanity frayed with each stitch, her identity becoming intertwined with the grotesque garment taking shape before her. She was no longer just sewing, she was giving form to the whispers. She was building a prison, though she didn't know it yet. After weeks of relentless, feverish work, it was finished. She placed the creation on a mannequin in the center of her workshop. It was a long flowing gown, sewn with an impossible, flawless seam. The pale, skin-like material draped perfectly, looking both beautiful and deeply disturbing. At its collar, she had fashioned the remnants into a mask, its features smooth and serene. The gown stood there, bathed in candlelight, and it almost seemed to breathe. The air around it was still and heavy. Her masterpiece was complete. It was perfect. It was eternal. And now, it was waiting. It was Halloween night. The sounds of joyful shouts and laughter echoed from the streets outside, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence within the shop. Madame Corvain looked at the gown, her creation, her obsession. The whispers were louder than ever, a chorus in her mind. Just once, a voice that sounded like her own thought. I just want to try it on. Just for a moment, to feel perfection against my skin. Slowly, as if in a trance, she took the gown from the mannequin. The fabric was cold at first as it slid over her skin, but then it grew warm. Too warm, it clung to her, molding to her shape like a second skin. Suddenly, the stitches tightened. The seams, once so perfect, began to wrap around her body like living vines, pulling taut, digging into her flesh. Panic seized her. She screamed, her nails clawing desperately at the gown, trying to tear it off. But it was no longer a separate object. The fabric and her skin were merging, the seams sealing themselves shut. She was being consumed. She stumbled to the large mirror in the corner of the shop, her own horrified reflection staring back at her. And then, the face in the mirror blinked, but she hadn't. Her skin was no longer her own. A new, triumphant whisper echoed from behind the glass, seeming to come from her own reflection. Perfect, it said. Now, you'll never take me off. The next morning, the joyful sounds of Halloween were gone, replaced by an eerie quiet on Ashbury Lane. The little costume shop was dark. The candlelight had finally gone out. But locals passing by noticed something new and terrifying in the dusty front window. A mannequin, which had never been there before, stood facing the street. It was dressed in a pale skin-colored gown. Its head was turned just slightly, as if watching the people go by, and its eyes, once painted and lifeless, were now wet and glistening, filled with an unspeakable, trapped horror. For years, the shop remained closed, a silent monument to a forgotten tragedy. Eventually, new owners, brave or foolish, decided to reopen it. They broke the locks in pride, opened the boarded-up doors, letting sunlight stream into the dusty space for the first time in decades. Inside, they found everything, just as it had been left. A sewing table stood in the back, still set with rusted needles and spools of dried, red-brown thread. And there, on the wall behind the table, was a final, chilling message, written in what looked like faded crimson. She finished it. She's wearing it. We are perfect. The mannequin in the window was gone, But some say on cold autumn nights, you can still see a figure standing in that dark window, its eyes glistening, forever trapped in a perfect costume that will never. They say some places are best left alone, places where memories are buried so deep they stay in the very ground they happened on. Tonight, we're going to one of those places. Welcome to Willow Creek Street, a neighborhood that died 30 years ago. No one trick-or-treats here anymore. The houses are just dark, empty shells, windows boarded up like closed eyes, lawns choking on weeds. Parents in the surrounding towns have one rule for their kids: stay away from Willow Creek. But here's the thing, every Halloween night, without fail, the streetlights flicker back to life. It's like the neighborhood itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to return. So, what happened here? Let's turn back the clock 30 years. It was a perfect Halloween night. The air was crisp, leaves crunched underfoot, and the street was alive with the laughter of children. Among them were 5 friends, their costumes all handmade, a special touch from their parents. There was a skeleton, a cheerful clown, a rustic scarecrow, a classic ghost, and a little vampire. They were a blur of excitement, running from door to door, their candy bags getting heavier with each stop. They were last seen laughing, just a group of kids having the time of their lives. And then, they were gone. Just like that, they vanished. One moment, they were there. The next, it was as if they had never existed. The police launched a massive search, combing every inch of the neighborhood, questioning everyone. But they found nothing, not a single trace of the 5 children. It was as if the night itself had swallowed them whole. In the aftermath of such a tragedy, the town was consumed by grief and fear. And with fear came whispers. Rumors started to spread, an urban legend taking root in the community's sorrow. They said the costumes were cursed. The story went that they were sewn by a grief-stricken woman who had lost her own child on Halloween years before. Desperate and broken, she channeled her pain into her craft, creating new costumes not from fabric and thread, but from what the legend called borrowed souls. A chilling tale, born from a town's broken heart. After that year, Halloween died in Willow Creek. The joy was gone, replaced by a permanent, haunting silence. The decorations came down for the last time, and the doors stayed shut. The street became a ghost of its former self. Fast forward to 2022. The story of Willow Creek had become a favorite campfire tale for a new generation. For college friends Zevin, Mia Blake, and Norit was the perfect subject for their YouTube channel, which specialized in exploring haunted locations, armed with cameras, powerful flashlights, and a prop Ouija board for dramatic effect. They planned to document their own Halloween adventure in the abandoned neighborhood. Blake, the group's resident thrill-seeker, grinned at the camera as they drove. Get ready, everyone, it's the Urban Legend Challenge. The last trick-or-treat on Willow Creek Street. They were buzzing with excitement, a mix of genuine curiosity and the thrill of breaking the rules. They were chasing a ghost story, hoping to capture something spooky, something that would make their channel blow up. They had no idea they were about to become part of the story themselves. When they finally arrived, the street was just as the legends described. Dark, silent, and unnervingly still. Every lamppost was dead, except for one. At the far end of the street, a single, faint orange glow pulsed over the porch of an old, decrepit house on the corner. It was an eerie, lonely beacon in the oppressive darkness. Drawn by the light, they approached cautiously. The porch groaned under their feet, thick cobwebs brushing against their faces. And there, sitting in the middle of the rotting porch, was a rusty, old-fashioned candy bowl. Embossed on its side were 2 simple words, "Take one." But it wasn't candy inside. Instead, nestled in a bed of dust and dead leaves, were 5 small, folded costumes. "Dude, no way, this is perfect," Evan exclaimed, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. He reached in and pulled one out. A small skeleton suit. He ran his fingers over the fabric. It felt strangely cold, almost damp to the touch, and heavier than it should have been. It felt old. Intrigued, the others followed his lead. Mia, always one for theatrics, grabbed the clown costume. Blake, ever the showman for his camera, took the scarecrow. Nora, the most hesitant of the group, reluctantly picked up the last one. The ghost. They were all there. A skeleton, a clown, a scarecrow, and a ghost. Only the vampire was missing. They laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the dead quiet, and started putting them on for the video. This was it, the money shot. And that's when it happened. The moment the last costume was on, a second light flickered on at the house next door, then another. And another. One by one, every house on Willow Creek Street lit up, their windows glowing with a warm, welcoming orange light. The entire street was suddenly alive, bathed in a nostalgic Halloween glow, as if it was welcoming them. Or something else. Back home. Okay, this is officially creepy, Nora whispered, her earlier excitement completely gone, replaced by a knot of dread in her stomach. The air grew cold, and a sudden wind kicked up, but it was strange, it only seemed to be blowing from behind them, pushing them further down the street. And then they heard it. Faint at first, carried on the wind from the end of the block. The unmistakable sound of children giggling. Did you guys hear that? Mia asked, her voice trembling. Blake, ever the vlogger, immediately pointed his camera towards the sound, trying to capture the evidence. But the footage on his screen started to glitch, the image fracturing into a mess of digital static. And then, for just a split second, the image cleared. And he saw them. At the far end of the street, standing under the next lamppost, were 5 small figures. They were too far to see clearly, but their silhouettes were undeniable. And they were wearing the exact same costumes as the friends. The missing vampire was with them. The children weren't moving. They weren't playing or laughing anymore. They were just standing there, perfectly still, their heads tilted as if they were watching. Evan, his bravado gone, took a step back and fumbled his flashlight. It slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the pavement and rolling across the asphalt. It spun a few times before coming to a stop, its beam pointing directly at a pair of small, worn-out shoes. He slowly lifted his gaze from the shoes, up the small legs of a skeleton costume, until he was looking directly into its face. The child in the skeleton costume was now inches from him, so close he could smell the damp earth clinging to the fabric. The plastic mask was cracked, and through the opening he saw not a child's face, but a black, hollow, endless void. A dry, raspy voice, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, whispered from the void. You wore it. Evan's blood ran cold. The little figure tilted its head, and the whisper came again, seeming to echo from all around them. Now we can come back. Instantly, the costumes began to tighten. The fabric, once loose, now felt alive, writhing like muscle and constricting around them. It squeezed their skin, the seams digging into their flesh like sharp claws. Panic set in. They screamed, clawing desperately at the material, trying to rip it off. But it was no use. The fabric was like a second skin. And where their nails managed to tear the seams, the stitches didn't just rip, they bled, a dark, thick liquid seeping from the threads. The costumes were consuming them, pulling them in. Their screams were muffled as the masks molded to their faces, their identities dissolving into the old, cursed fabric. By morning, the magic was gone. Willow Creek Street was dark and silent once more. The porch lights were out. The candy bowl on the old corner house had vanished. It was as if the night's events had been nothing but a nightmare. But in the nearby town, as the sun rose, some early risers swore they saw something strange. 5 small children, trick-or-treating at dawn. Their costumes looked old and handmade, stained with something dark and wet. And when they laughed, it wasn't the sound of individual children. It sounded like 5 voices, layered and distorted, laughing as one. Weeks later, the police found the 4 friends' van, abandoned at the entrance to Willow Creek Street. Inside, everything was just as they'd left it, including Blake's camera, which had been left on, still recording. The investigators watched the footage, their faces growing paler with every minute. The final frame was a steady shot of the old house on the corner. The porch light flickered one last time, and in its glow, 5 small silhouettes stood together on the lawn, holding candy bags. They turned slowly, in unison, and waved at the camera, and from the camera's speaker, a final, chilling whisper could be heard. A chorus of voices speaking as one. Thanks for letting us play again. So if you ever find yourself near a place with a dark history, a place people tell you to avoid, maybe it's best to listen. Some stories aren't just stories, and some invitations should never, ever be accepted. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into the dark, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chilling exploration. Stay safe out there.